Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Viking Chats. And I am delighted to be joined today by someone I consider a good friend, Nicola Thivessen. Nicola, tell us a little bit, for those who don't know you, because I'm quite chuffed about the fact that you don't often get seen on things like this. So, whilst there will be some out there in the know going, nice to see Nicola on stuff, for those out there who don't know who you are, let's hear a little bit of your
I'm probably
backstory.
a bit of a social media recluse, actually. I need to be better at social media. But we met, didn't we? Well, we're just saying, weren't we, 9-10 years ago, very kindly through the TDS at an event, and then actually really got to know each other working together closely at the Lettings Industry Council, which is chaired by the amazing Teresa Wallace.
And obviously more recently
on the
Zoopla
Zoopla Lettings. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, what haven't we spoken about in the last decade, Kristjan?
So let's just talk a little bit first. So how long have you been in and around agency now, roughly?
So it's coming up to 20 years, actually. It must be now 18 years without doing the maths, and always worked within the sort of governance compliance field, lettings operations, tenant services. So started off working in a subsidiary of Countrywide, and that was early 2000s that would have been. And my career first started in renewals, which is where I really got to know lettings. And actually anyone who's worked in renewals knows that you really do learn everything, because you encounter so much mid-tenancy. It's unreal. And then through there developed my career into compliance. I moved to Chesterton's, where I was their compliance director, and we sort of built and grew the compliance division. And then more recently KFH, where I was responsible for lettings operations.
And how long were you at KFH for?
KFH 6 years.
6 years.
Yeah.
So I think when we met, you would have been at Chesterton's.
Yes.
So I think when we met, we hadn't even launched the depository yet.
No, it was concept. It was a baby, I think.
We partnered with TDS, and like you said, you were their guest. They kindly invited us along to, I think, like the President's Gala dinner, the black tie thing.
We were very smartly dressed.
We were,
I do remember that.
which is quite standard for you, as everyone knows. Not my natural habitat, but once in a while. So we met then, and ended up sat next to each other and got on talking about the wonderful, sexy land of tenancy, lettings, compliance and renewals. And then obviously from there, then having met each other, then we kind of got to know each other better, like you said, through the TLIC or the Lettings Industry Council.
Yes.
So now the TLIC is one of these kind of slightly weird organisations, isn't it? There'll be people watching this who've actually probably been in lettings for quite a while, who will still be unaware of the TLIC's existence. So I remember Eric first telling our dear mutual friend Eric Walker, who many of you out there will know as well. And we've already agreed I need to try and get him in for a chat on this at some point.
It's our mission, I think, now.
Let's get Eric in. Definitely get him down here. I think if I just bribe him with a good lunch and a bottle of wine afterwards, we should be fine. So I remember Eric telling me about it. It was at either like EA Masters or Estate Agent of the Year Awards. We were there, and I was chatting with him, and I remember him going, "Oh, you know what? We should get you into the Lettings Industry Council." And I was like, "What is this?" And he's like, "Oh, it's just people in the know meeting to talk about problems and opportunities and where the industry's going." So it's a fascinating thing. Now, was it conceived by Savills, because they kind of host everyone? They're the generous hosts.
I think Teresa, sort of thinking back, she spearheaded it. So it really did start as
Teresa Wallace.
Teresa Wallace, yes.
Who is in the latest Property Mark magazine.
Right,
if you're not sure who Teresa Wallace is, have a little flick through that. Again, fascinating woman.
Absolute guru, just phenomenal lady. But it was a small group of agents, I think predominantly, I want to say London-based, might not have been. And we kept meeting anyway in various situations. It was all around the time of the tenant fee ban coming in, or sort of that when that legislation was being mooted, it was still a bill. And I think there was realisation that there needed to be a sort of better coming together of agents, and not just agents, actually, property professionals, because it's actually far from just an agency group. Exactly, it's suppliers. There are tenant groups as well who are there.
And importantly, we obviously have government. We have kind of MHCLG usually, or often House of Lords. With Lord Best turning up.
And the focus is best practice. You know, it really is about driving best practice. I mean, one of the projects we've worked on for a long time is trying to spearhead and really drive the property MOT concept.
The transparency of the myriad of stuff that we do to protect tenants.
And how do you demonstrate that in the most clear, transparent way for a tenant themselves to be able to recognise this property's safe? And that's something that's been championed, but amongst so many other things. And I think with those agents that were coming together, I really would credit Theresa with recognising that that needed to be expanded, driven. And I mean, now you go to a meeting, then they're normally once every 3 to 4 months, and there's easily 100 people in the room, plus people
and also
online.
Tons of people online as well. So I mean, what I would say is I don't necessarily think there's any primary criteria other than you need to kind of be an established letting agent that aspires to kind of do things professionally. But I think other than that, and again, as you alluded to, it might have started as a London thing, but it's definitely not London exclusive. There are agents who travel down from Manchester and even further north to come and be there on the day, and like I said, can join online. It's a really interesting one. I mean, obviously with everything we've been through the last few years with the Renters Reform Bill into the Renters' Rights, and obviously now into the Act, lots of debating in there. And Theresa, because of TLIC, was one of the few kind of figureheads that MHCLG really engaged with throughout that process in some of their round tables. I think more recently after the Act, she was one of the ones along with Ben.
That's right, she's invited regularly, and she sits alongside Property Mark, the national, the NRLA, the National Residential Landlords Association. And she gives evidence at the parliamentary all group meetings as well. So she's fully active.
And we often get, I love what we get as well through that as well, is often emails coming down from her and the team being like, oh, government's consulting on this. If you want to say, here's the link, or government's looking for vendors or buyers or landlords or tenants to fill out this. Sorry, excuse me. And so I think one thing we always get frustrated with as agents is, well, call it perception. I'm not sure. It's probably pretty accurate. It's the fact that we don't often get a voice in these things from a government perspective. I think all the Renters Reform Rights Act process kind of did a better job than historically. But I think definitely one of the reasons I was really keen to join was making sure that there's smaller independent agents have a voice in the room.
It's really important. Really important.
You know, because it's great to have your Savills and your Chestertons and your KFHs and Property Franchise Group and everything else in there. But as we well know, you know, our industry is still, even in the age of acquisition that we're in, is still vastly dominated by small independent businesses.
And actually within TLIC you also have individuals coming in who are in estate management as well. You've got real experts in the room like Kate Faulkner as well, you know, and Kate is just, well, OBE, you know, that says it all, doesn't it, around the services.
And she got a Lifetime Achievement Award on Friday
well
at the
deserved, well deserved. And it really does just bring all of those individuals together. You've got redress scheme representation, professional body representation, you know, Property Mark always attends. So it is a fantastic group. And actually what's good is they also have working groups as well. So when there is a lot of activity within the industry, and when I say when there is, when isn't there?
It is at the moment, it's constant.
And you know, Theresa will sort of identify the groups that are needed and bring together 6, 7, 8 sort of individuals from all, you know, different parts of the industry as well to work on certain projects, produce papers for government as well. So, and it is so needed. You know, I think we probably all recognised at the time of the tenant fee ban coming in that we as an industry did not have enough engagement with government. We did from our professional bodies who've always done a brilliant job, but not from the voice of the sort of agents, the inventory clerks, the redress schemes all coming together as one sector. And there's no side between tenant or landlord. It is about driving best practice. Yeah. That's really what it comes down to. And actually one of the things we've really called for and pushed for is about better enforcement as well.
Well, this is it, right? I mean, I think you and I, you definitely specialed in compliance. So it's kind of like, if it's not going to be enforced, why do businesses even need a compliance officer in a compliance role if you just kind of, and I think that's sometimes how we feel as an industry, right? And also for landlords, we keep on getting thrown more and more legislation, more and more rules. And obviously we're going through, one of the biggest changes of the last 40, 50 years and these sweeping changes coming in with the Renters' Rights Act. But again, as we keep harking back, like there is that feeling that sometimes this feels like kind of purgatory for the good guys.
Yes,
for your good landlords and your good agents, the ones who are already towing the line, who always have every intention to be trained and educated on what the latest laws are, making sure that those are implemented and followed and iterated. That's not to say that mistakes can't happen. We're human and we're businesses, but the aspiration is there. And yet, we keep on seeing more and more come. And I think that, that's why you and I think bonded so much on the property MOT project. And what I found really fascinating with that is, a lot of that wasn't fundamentally about the legislation itself. It was just like, can we stop for a minute? And just like, we've got a lot that means tenants are really, really safe.
Yes.
It just, like as you said earlier, it needs to be more transparent for tenants so they understand their rights and protections.
Yes, yeah.
But also enforcement needs to be more unilateral and more transparent.
It's
and more effective.
Yeah, exactly. And there's nothing more frustrating than when you invest in the resources, the staff, the training, the practices, the policies to do it right, do it properly. And for, the whole aim is to keep a tenant safe and to do the right thing. And then witness those out there who claim to be agents, but they're not doing it right, not through accidents happening, but intentionally
just
turning a blind eye,
just not being bothered, not making the effort,
and it's exploitation. and what we want to see is that driven out. As we always say, we want a level playing field. We want a reputable sector, which we believe it is.
I mean, it does, and I think that's the other thing. I think again, a lot of people listening or watching this will agree. The trouble we have, and I don't think, I think this started with us more than other sectors, but I think this is unilaterally how the news just seems to work nowadays. It's just all doom and gloom.
Yeah,
we love our doom and gloom.
Everyone loves a dramatic news story. Everyone loves a dramatic
news story. And I think the sad thing is, in our industry, when everything goes well, people are just in their home, happy.
Yes, exactly.
A tenant is living their life and just feeling safe and sound and well looked after. Landlord gets their rent on time and an agent just kind of does the job as they should. Unfortunately, that's not the most exciting story, is it? So we always get your 10 in a shed slum landlords or your,
of course,
25 people in a 3-bed HMO or whatever it is, which unfortunately kind of tarnishes our industry the way it does. Slightly lost where I was going to go on that one. There was definitely a thought of thread there. That's right. So that's what I wanted to mention. So I had a bit of a rant this morning because that article, I think was it on Friday, about trading standards and their sting operation in the Midlands on CMP, which initially read like this, hey guys, aren't we fabulous? We're enforcing the compliance thing. But I don't know about you, I read that and I was like, sorry, hold on. This was only done, I think, in approximately like the Birmingham area. It was a 3-year operation, which I don't really get because surely compliance is just constantly ongoing.
Yeah.
They called it a sting operation, which I also found really bizarre because in my mind, like, a sting is all about kind of tricking.
Exactly.
Tricking someone into, incriminating themselves. Whereas the whole point of CMP is it's meant to be super transparent. You go on the agent's website, have they got an up-to-date certificate? Cool. Check with the CMP provider that indeed that is valid and they've got CMP insurance. Kind of job done. Doesn't really feel like a sting operation to me. So whilst it is great to see some enforcement happening, with our heads on how we've talked about it and how we drill into compliance at TLIC and at Zoopla. I mean, we've spent God knows how many hours over the last few years amongst us debating all the various elements of the renters reform and rights, and debating some of the maybe intended or unintended consequences with MHCLG. What do they call themselves as interim? I can't even remember the weird acronym they used before.
DLUC, wasn't it? Yeah.
DLUC, yeah. There we go. That one's done and dusted. Oh, that computer in the background sounds like it's about to explode. So, yeah, I think I read that and the headline was like, hooray, there's some proactive enforcement. But I don't know about you, I kind of read down into that and I was just a bit like, God, this shouldn't be this complicated.
It shouldn't be. And it all sounded, I mean, again, it's all about the drama for the story, isn't it? It sounds all like there's some sort of undercover work going on, or FBI agents wandering around.
Tom Cruise crashing through your shop window.
And exactly as you say, CMP rules are really simple. So the first step is look at the websites, as you said. Next step is contact the agents where nothing's displayed. Has it just not shown on their website? Was it hidden? Has it slipped off because they've upgraded their website?
Yeah,
have they just missed something?
Was it an accident?
And then the next question is, do you actually have it? You know, so if it's not just on the website, that's one level of breach.
Yeah.
If you didn't have it, that's another level. Then when that's pointed out, how quickly do you acquire it?
Yeah.
That's another level. And it doesn't mean that all of those can't be enforced, but actually it should be about collaboration. It should be about improving the industry.
But CMP was one of those really sensible bits, right?
Yeah,
it was one of those things like the
100%,
deposit laws when they came in, which were absolutely needed.
Tenants' funds should be protected. There's no doubt about it.
CMP, because we work in a primarily unregulated industry. You know, some people find it bewildering that, you know, you can set up a company within lettings and be handling quite quickly millions of pounds, because it quickly piles up, particularly if you're in London with the rents that we get.
Sorry, I said tenants' funds, I meant landlords' funds, but same thing, you know, in terms of your clients' funds.
It's your landlord's rent, it's your tenants' deposits if you're an insured deposit scheme member, which we are at base. I think you guys are at KFH.
Yes, yeah.
But that should be so simple, right? That should be like, it's a really simple piece of legislation. That should be so easy to be like, cool, here's our list of valid policies.
Exactly.
You know, or even almost start from there, because there's only what, 2 or 3 providers of CMP to the industry.
Well, I was just about to say, you surely would engage with the providers first, right? These are the agents we can't find evidence of just visibly online. How can you confirm their members? Fine, we'll just write to them and say, why isn't that online? Get it online, please. You know, job done, problem solved. Yeah. And you know, then you've got your list of agents who didn't have it. That's your problem area. You know, that's the area that you should be working with, enforcing, you know, and
this is
dealing
the thing.
with.
We've had quite a few fairly superficial, but just simple practical stuff. You had your mandatory ombudsman membership. Obviously, we had the tenant fee act and what should and shouldn't be shown on your website. I mean, those 3 to me are pretty, like, you shouldn't need a task force, right? You shouldn't need, like, this should really probably be primarily driven by software, right? That's going out, reading websites, going, like you said, here's an initial review and this flags this. That then gets passed on to a human who then goes, right, okay, now we cross-check it with this and we cross-check it with that, you know, for a minor infringement, like not displaying it or having not updated
not updating,
it's a slap on the wrist. Yeah. But like you say, if you're not having it, why do we have these laws, you know, if we're not going to enforce them?
Exactly.
Because as we all know, one of the worst bits of press that comes out about the letting agent and property management community is when a business, unfortunately, through whatever circumstances goes under, and invariably there is a bit of a black hole in those accounts, and then we see this this horrendous commentary online about how bad is it that people are just left with this black hole of rent and deposits missing. Deposits often then fall on the landlord as well, so not only are they out of rent,
and they were stories we heard of all the time previously. Now if you hear of that, the first question is, where was their CMP? Where was their money protection? And that's the thing, isn't it? It's something that you don't, and it's not a big news story anymore. And I'd much rather hear about sting operations being around horrendously managed properties, or lack of management, unsafe properties, danger within a property. That's where that enforcement
proper rogue landlord, rogue agent.
Yes, enforce the CMP, of course, do that, but it doesn't need a sting operation, does it? It's a simple task. Use the resource and focus it in the areas where we really do need to see ongoing improvements.
And also, if you think about it, right, we just talked about kind of the worst thing that came out of lack of CMP is a business going under. Now, most businesses all businesses have to file company accounts. So even if you go, right, do you know what? We don't want to patrol the 24,000 UK estate letting agents. We just want to know which the problem ones are. So surely just have that initial trigger being late filed returns, substantial losses, and again,
probably tells you quite a story, doesn't it?
It tells you which ones to keep an eye on, right? Because you and I both know, ultimately you can run a good business, you can screw up and forget to renew your CMP. It happens.
Of course, mistakes happen.
None of us want it to happen, but it happens. But fundamentally, bottom line is, as long as the business is fine, it doesn't really become material. But if financial distress is the primary underpinning cause of why it's so needed, then surely maybe that is the data-driven point of focus. And then that allows trading standards, who, as we know, are so vastly under-resourced. I mean, what is it, 6 or 7 people in the estate and letting agent team patrolling the entire UK estate and letting agent market? I mean, it's bonkers, isn't it, really, when we think about it?
Well, you hear about, excuse me, just the London boroughs. You get a variety, don't you, within borough of, in some cases they'll have 3 or 4 enforcement officers. Sometimes they've got a part-time officer responsible for everything. That they are just so under-resourced, and that in itself is a challenge for them. And it's something we would love to see be improved and have more funding for, because then they can really target the right places.
So I mean, this kind of brings us on nicely to another point of contention that we all kind of, I think we saw value in when they first started, but now with so many things moving on, is obviously property licensing.
Yes, I knew that was coming. I did.
You teed that up beautifully. And obviously with it having been in the press recently, with our politician faux pas, which...
Everyone now knows what a landlord licence is, don't they? There's no excuse if you haven't got one, because, everyone's seen it in the press now.
But one of the shocking things, the revelations that we had, and it was quite timely, that the moment that whole Rachel Reeves thing kicked off with Southwark, we'd had an email from Southwark about 10 days before about a property licence application that we'd put in, coming back to us over 3 years. We'd submitted our licence application over 3 years ago, and the email had come back to go, it appears almost everything's in place, but this and this has expired. Shocker. Gas safety being one of those. What I loved was the fact that we were given 14 days to provide all of them, which, as you and I both know, an agent or a landlord knows their stuff. They've got that stuff to hand anyway. But 14 days to provide those, or the whole application gets thrown out, and the 500, 600, 700, 800 quid fee, I can't remember what it was, kept. The hilarious thing since then is the tenants had vacated, the property had been sold, had been bought by homeowners, been refurbished, and they now live there.
We have seen so many cases similar to that, where it's been 2 to 3 years before the property's inspected. You've had, 2 or 3 change of tenants in some cases by then. To your point, sometimes it's no longer even eligible for a licence anymore, because if it's in an additional area and you've got less than 3 sharers, straight away it's almost
exactly,
a waste.
The demographics changed.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, I think certainly at the beginning, everyone saw, I think, the value in licensing. I totally support the concept.
The concept.
Of what
I think this was it. The
do.
concept of how we thought it was going to be implemented, which was kind of around this preface of, we kind of know where the bad stuff happens. That was always kind of my understanding, was the councils were like, we know where the bad stuff is. We just don't have the powers to do with it.
And there were some local authorities, like Newham is the prime example, isn't it, where they did improve housing as a result of licensing. And I think they did the right thing at the beginning, absolutely was the thing to do. Get more control, set more standards.
But again, they knew they had a massive problem.
Yes.
Everyone knew they had a massive problem with standards. They were given that special exemption first and second time round, because the whole idea behind this obviously was meant to be 20%, the worst 20% of your housing stock was targeted. Yeah. Anything out that required a special exemption, which we saw with Newham, and that made sense. Yeah. And that got granted. The problem we've got now, of course, is back in December, the government made the infinitely wise decision to remove that cap. And so now we're seeing councils across the country. We're seeing it with London. Hackney's done a massive one. Islington are going through one at the moment. I mean, we'll see it across the entire UK. They're all doing this massive audit. The claims made in the proposals, knowing what we know about how those schemes have been run. I wrote a massive piece on the Hackney licensing proposals and kind of picked apart a lot of what they say. And if you really do feel like geeking out, if you go to our base website, it's a long one and it's quite dry. There's a lot of data in there. But equally, if you're like an agent or a landlord and you feel similarly about local licensing, you might want to check that out just to kind of take some ideas on how we tackle this. Because I do think, this whole premise of, we're driving up standards, which, part of my thing is, well, if these schemes work so well, all of you are on your second and sometime now got your eyes on a third term scheme. If they're so effective, why do we still need them? Because surely, in theory, that 5-year scheme should kind of solve the problem. Exactly. Maybe the second one, but yeah. And then the other preface of, we're here to protect our residents and make sure that, they're completely safe in a completely safe home and you're a legitimate entity, whether you're an agent or landlord. How you can make those claims safe in the knowledge that you're going to take 1, 2, 3 years. Yeah. I mean, I'd say the Southwark application thing totally blew our minds as an office. Because, we deal a lot with Tower Hamlets. And I would say with Tower Hamlets, it's common that we see it around a year-ish. Some between 6 to 12 months, that's rare. But we see quite a few trickle over into that year, and we're already like, this is a bit of a joke.
We had quite a few, 2 years. There was one borough where 2 years was the average time it took for them to do the inspection in order to grant the licence for an additional licence. And you just think so much has happened in that 2 years in a tenancy, or, like I say, change of tenancy. But I think the other part which makes it so complicated now is, of course, every borough has its own set of conditions. So if we use London as the example, but this can apply to places like Manchester as well, where I think they've got 10 different
10 wards,
exactly. But here we're talking, I don't know the exact number, it's at least 30, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's like 32.
Yeah, and you've got each borough with its own set of unique conditions. Some, yes, of course, they're standardised, and then you see these weird and wonderful ones come through that in some cases don't make any sense.
Well, and also they're not written into law. We've had councils come to us going, you provided X, Y, Z, but you haven't provided this. And it's like, because it's not a legal requirement. Oh, but we want it. It's like, but it's not a legal requirement. I mean, there's been times where we've been like, oh, do you know what?
Well, we've seen, councils put in things like only the licence holder can collect the rent. Well, if the licence holder is the landlord in some cases, but the agent is managing and collecting the rent, why does the agent need to become the licence holder? They can sign a declaration to take ownership of responsibilities of conditions, and it goes totally against what the Housing Act itself says within it, and it's so contradictory in its own way. And you sort of, when you're dealing with these weird and wonderful that vary across 32 different boroughs, let's say, I think now at least 28 of them have sort of schemes that are not just the mandatory one, it's just absolutely impossible for agents to constantly keep track without ploughing in tons of resource.
Well, this is the other
staff.
thing, right? Because the councils do their own thing, they can't pool resources.
No.
This is the other madness, right?
Exactly.
All 32 London boroughs could have just gone, do you know what, guys? Let's just agree this is the London framework.
They could have done it under the GLA.
They could have done, under the GLA, central enforcement and processing.
Yes,
and just agreed however to attribute the funds, take out the costs and then attribute it, whatever.
Absolutely.
But
they all would have benefited from it. Obviously there is a financial gain to running a licensing scheme, and they could have all still received funds to run those schemes, but had they have had at least a central set of conditions, principles, and then yes, if some need to be tweaked because of the uniqueness of an area, fine, but that's one or two changes.
And that is a legitimate task force thing. That's like, right, guys, and
not an entirely unique set of conditions that vary wildly to another. And if you're a portfolio landlord with one property in one borough, one in another, that is just utterly confusing. And then you're almost hindering them from being compliant.
Well, there was a really interesting piece as well, and I'm trying to remember what the website's called. It's a property review site for tenants. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Oh, Marks Out of Tenancy.
Oh, right. Okay.
So they did I can't remember if they wrote the piece or they were asked to comment the piece, but they basically did an article a few months ago, probably about 6 months ago now, where they kind of destroyed this messaging from a lot of the councils going, oh, we don't really know where the problems are, we kind of know. And they wrote a really fascinating piece because they basically called BS on that. And they were like, look, if your priorities are overcrowding, unlicensed HMOs or even licensed HMOs where they've just slammed more people in there, they showed very clearly and very easily how councils can identify that through energy usage at the property, and also like data that they can see about bills and things registered with the property and all this sort of stuff. It was just a really, really fascinating piece because I saw it as I mean, they do have a stake in it in that, they're trying to play their part in driving up standards and giving tenants a voice of going, well, yes, you can review your agent and you can post a Google review or whatever, but who actually really reviews properties? So they're doing their bit, but I thought it was really interesting to see an organisation like them call it out and be like, actually, there's 3 or 4 data sets that you've got easy access, they're free or cheap, and they're really easy to implement to give you kind of a heat
And if
map.
you then couple that with crime data and statistics from your local police forces, you can see where the areas of antisocial behaviour are, and whether it's issues with behaviour, drugs, whatever it might be. Everyone knows where those areas are because the police will have that data. And so all of that could have been utilised in a much more strategic way to genuinely identify the hotspots, ensure safety in those areas. And instead what you've got now, because the legislation keeps changing or the permissions keep sort of widening, you've got boroughs who have phase 1 of a selective scheme starting in 2022, phase 2 starting in 2023, phase 3 starting in 2025. And it is so, if you're an agent operating in that borough, it's confusing. If you're a landlord operating in that borough, it is impossible because they are not experts in that legislation.
And then you start working across multiple boroughs.
Exactly.
And it starts getting bewildering.
And you're actually not helping them do the right thing. You're making it really, really hard for landlords and agents to do the right thing. And you know, if you are a larger business who can really focus a lot of staff, a lot of time, training and invest in managing that, fantastic. But for the independents, that's really difficult. Really, really difficult, or even just the smaller agents, and I just find it really unfair because it's not malice, it's not negligence, it's, you know, trying to do the right thing. But
because for us at Base, I mean, we've got a small portfolio in terms of the industry, but because we work pretty much London wide, I mean, we're predominantly East London, but I mean, we probably operate in 10 to 15 boroughs.
Yeah.
So, like, we're constantly like, what's the latest? What's happening with this?
You can't take your eye off it. No. You cannot take your eye off it.
Every time we do a let or anything, it's like, anytime we touch a property, pretty much, it's like, hold on, have we checked what the latest criteria are? Because it's like, oh, look at that. They've put a quiet notification on their board, and you have to go digging and finding it.
Yes. And you do genuinely have to take every licence, read every condition, determine as well who's got the liability, the licence holder or the agent, depending on the declarations, if you're signing it, who you're naming. They are really badly worded. Also, the councils themselves don't have the experts at the end of the phone.
Oh, that's the brilliant thing. When you call them up and ask, they usually don't
or they misinform you. The amount of times we've received incorrect advice and we've gone, that doesn't sound right. We've gone and verified it and it's absolutely incorrect. You know, there's so many levels and layers to it. And then if you want to throw more complexity, you've then got the Article 4 direction as well around planning permission, which is again starting now to take off. More and more boroughs are actually starting to use that, whereas before it was only in a couple of boroughs. So again, if we're just thinking about London, there are so many boroughs now starting to implement that Article 4. And
you know, planning departments are swamped at the best of times. Why do you want to burden them even more? And
the housing departments often do not talk to each other. So, you know, I've seen a case, fortunately it wasn't one of ours, but which I was very grateful for. But we saw a case through another agent that was a contact of ours who said, so they had the licence granted, and that licence was granted a good year ago, and then the planning department suddenly popped up and said, sorry, you don't actually have planning permission for a HMO. And so it completely left them in well, what do we do? We're now in breach of planning, but we've got this tenancy going that we don't have a break clause for. We can't just end.
Well, this is the other thing. No kind of recognition. And we're going into even a more complex space now, right? We're going into our open-ended periodic tenancies.
Absolutely that.
There has been no framing in that act about what do you do if legislation changes and you can't be compliant? How do you handle a tenant in that situation? What and those changes, those might be legislative changes that mean you need to make a physical change to the property, or you might just want/need to reinvest into your property to make it better, nicer, safer. Again, there is no mechanism in the clause to do that. So it's going to be intriguing in time to see how that plays out, where you've got a tenant who wants to stay long term and you've got a landlord who's like, cool, I'm happy to go and put in a new kitchen or whatever, but I can't put in a new kitchen with you living in the property.
Exactly.
And equally, you know, with the greatest of respect, you know, I'm a tenant myself, you know, depending how much you're spending, but yes, there's that ongoing investment, but something like a new kitchen, I mean, conservatively in London, you're going to be looking at 25 grand for a kitchen, and it goes steeply up from there. Especially
if you want a robust kitchen with longevity that can withstand potential changes in tenancies, potential sharer households and so on. It is not cheap.
Well, and also, you've got the unknowns as well. You try and wrap that in. I mean, we've just done a massive project a couple of doors away, you know, we put new kitchens and bathrooms in there. When we took the kitchen and one of the bathrooms out, what we discovered was a hidden leak that have been going on underneath everything.
The bane of our lives, leaks.
The entire subfloor of the property. So that was fine. It was a vacant property, so that was really easy. You know, I mean, I said easy for us. The client didn't find it easy because it was that surprise. But yeah, you know, if you have agreed with the tenant, oh look, we're going to come in and replace the kitchen whilst you're on holiday. It's going to take 7 days and it should be all tickety-boo by the time you come back. And then you come back, you know, you rip it out and through no fault of your own, you discover a leak, asbestos that you didn't know about, whatever it is. And all of a sudden that project becomes more complicated.
We've all got those stories as well, haven't we, where there's, you know, the leak that's appearing in the hallway, but then there's a bathroom above. Where's the leak originating from? Fine, you reseal the shower or the bathtub. Nope, it's still going. Then something else happens. Then there's damp because of the leak. And, you know, it becomes a little bit of a Pandora's box that you open or a can of worms,
I remember we've
it?
had people a couple of times in that flat, because particularly one of the bedrooms, be like, bedroom smells a bit musty. And we're like...
Yeah, and it
like,
takes time sometimes for leaks.
There was no visible sign of it at all. And I remember we've a few times we've been like, look, we'll get the carpets professionally steam cleaned, and we had that gone in and redone, and that kind of helped a little bit. But as we all know, they always smell a bit like wet dog when they've been always fine with carpets. They've been clean. It's a bit like your dry cleaning when you get caught in the rain. It's not the nicest smell. But short of kind of, and again, if you've got a tenant locked into a tenancy agreement where they're completely in control of how we're going to tackle that.
And they've got an expectation of time frame as well of, okay, well, that's going to be fixed in 3 days. And it's like...
any kind of reality.
No, exactly.
And like we said, even with the best of intentions, one thing we know about property is it loves taking what your plans are and just going...
Absolutely.
That's what you thought was going to happen, did it? So we've got that fun. And then... obviously, there's another aspect to the property licensing thing, because that tried to do some of the stuff we've talked about, which was it tried to make compliance a little bit more transparent
it tried
for
to.
tenants.
It overcomplicated it, and
massively.
That became the issue. It got, you know, it is that true story of too many cooks, you know, with every single borough involved in their own scheme, their own rules, as we said. And actually, when you take it back to the basics of what they were trying to do, it aligns very much with our sort of property MOT proposals around have a nice set of standards that everybody knows, make it visible,
understandable.
And that was the idea, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Here's the licence, we're okay.
Yeah.
That was the point of it. But some licences are 6 pages long with full of conditions. Some and most conditions are absolutely right to have on there, you know, absolutely, you know, don't block fire exits, for example. Of course not. Some of the conditions are just, well, they're just ludicrous. They just don't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some being quite heavy-handed with stuff where, like, we've had, like, multi-floor shared property. We don't do HMOs in the idea of renting out individual rooms. I think probably like you do as well. We do HMOs as an entire household, typically an AST, or it might be an unregulated company agreement or something like that. But typically all inclusive. I remember we had one recently where they insisted we had to have a smoke and carbon monoxide alarm in every single room. And this is already a flat where it was a mains powered ring fence, fully monitored, like it was already above and beyond.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing we've found is it feels like even when you submit a totally compliant property and you're like, these are good properties. Yeah. This is like our dream landlord. Like if every landlord in the UK could be like this, there would be no problem. And we're a good agent. You submit this application and it feels like they're just trying to find something just to be like, oh no, we've done our bit.
Yeah. My favourite is emergency lighting. I love that one. We see it in so many licenses, often in flats, you know, or in a shared house, as in not roomlets. Yeah. But, you know, you've got 3 sharers living in a 3-bedroom semi-detached house.
Like you have in a hotel.
Exactly. And then they want their, you know, they insist in the conditions to have emergency lighting. And you think, but it's a 3-bedroom semi-detached house.
It's a house. You know? Like, what do you guys do at home when there's a power cut?
Exactly.
You know? And
again, it's just about it. They sort of take this one sort of condition and just blanket apply it sometimes without really thinking about what it is they're asking, or sometimes they just they haven't fully actually understood the nature of that HMO, because it is often just assumed to be a room-let property.
Well, I mean,
and
I had an
it's
argument
just a
with
shared
one
house.
who didn't fully understand what an EICR was.
Yes,
they got confused between an EICR and a PAT test.
PAT test, yeah.
And they got quite aggressive with us about it, to which, we were on the point of going, we're just, because the landlord was like, it's not legally required. I'm not freaking paying for it. And so we just got to this point where we were like, okay, we're probably just going to have to pay for these ourselves, just because this is just breaking my brain.
Yeah.
But the hilarious thing was, thank God, I was like, we brought it to a head. It was like, can you just please send me the legislation you're quoting? Just send me. And they were like, here it is on the Gov site. And it was the EICR stuff. And it was like, right, and thankfully we got them to back down. But like you said, knowledge, understanding, training, resource.
And I definitely would say one of the things we've learned a long time is never, if your gut is telling you it's wrong, what you've been told by the council is wrong, question it, speak to somebody else. Escalate it. Don't ignore it, because that's the worst thing you could do.
Yeah, don't
Never
ignore it, and don't go back being too aggressive.
Exactly, yeah. Don't get into battle either. But actually, the best thing you can do is go and ask the questions, query it.
We understood
exactly
X, Y, Z.
Yeah, and quite often, and we've done that many times, because we, like all of our organisations, a lot of people working there as well, especially when they launch a new scheme in a council, they hire in new people to handle the extra applications, and they are not housing experts. And they've been trained very quickly to go and just process these licenses, but they will be answering some of these inquiries. And I think a lot of the time people do get to know their contacts in the council, who they can reach out to. And that's also the best thing to do, is find your expert in the council.
We've had quite a few overreaches where they've come at us really aggressively about stuff. And it does come, I don't know if it's intended, but they do come across very aggressive.
But I think all us good agents, no one wants to get licensing wrong. You don't want to. So anytime you get questioned about a license, you automatically go, oh no, and then when you look into it, you go, no, we are good.
No,
we're fine.
We've done exactly what we should have done.
Exactly that. Sometimes it can be quite daunting. It can be scary. But then I've also seen on the other side where we've had to really convince clients that this is serious.
Yes.
They just don't, especially when it's a new scheme in a new area. They say, well, this is all nonsense. I'm going to write to the council. And you have to explain, no, this has been through consultation. It's set in law.
Rules,
Please don't delay. Get your licence in, and it's the whole education piece. And it's still a relatively new thing.
And I think in London we're quite lucky, because the licensing costs fundamentally compared to the rent.
Yes, yeah.
What the average scheme is ballpark £1,000-ish.
It's not cheap, is it, as a landlord, when
but
everything
over 5
else,
years,
but
£200 a year in the London. The trouble is, it's the upfront and everything else. So it's that kind of cash flow basis. But I think in London we are lucky that a lot of these things, as a percentage of revenue generated as income, it's much more affordable than if you're like some Welsh country landlord who's earning £500 a month.
I mean, it's across 5 years, like you say. And that's when people. It's like when people first get the cost of their EICR and the remedial works or whatever. Then when you realise, okay, that's only once every 5 years, you relax a little bit.
And after that first big spend, hopefully not going to be too much.
Exactly. But you're right. Outside of London, it's a big cost. When you put that as a ratio against the rent received as well.
So the one thing also we haven't talked about property licensing, obviously. When property licensing came, was it 2011 they started rolling it out? I think.
So it was around then, wasn't it? Because it was introduced through the Housing Act 2004, and then it was...
I want to say like 2010, 2011 was kind of when it actually started being implemented. It was somewhere around there. But a lot of the compliance that we've had layered on top of that since then didn't exist. And obviously... More recently, we had HHSRS, that really sexy, easy acronym, kick in. Was that March, April this year? I think that came in.
The revamped,
The revamped. And then obviously now we've got on top of that the Renters' Rights Act with everything that's bringing in with AWAB's law and Decent Home Standard, which, I think they've delayed now till 2027. which I don't think was a surprise with AWABs because of how long that's taken to come into social, which was really where it was needed first anyway.
And actually, I'm really pleased that they have delayed it in the sense of they are clearly wanting to get it right. They're working on it, they're looking at it, they're not just rushing in legislation that isn't going to work. And so let's hope. Anyway.
But with all this framing, because the Renters' Rights Act does frame a lot of this stuff much more clearly, we've got the landlord ombudsman coming in, which is great.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
I'd love to see how they're going to police that when they struggle
it's
to police
a big question of
agent
mine.
ombudsman membership. But maybe that will be tied into the register.
I mean, with agents, I feel like it's easier to hold an agent to account through the redress scheme. How they're going to do that with the landlord, I haven't figured that out. Exactly. That's exactly my thinking.
Because they're not obliged to have an entity in the UK per se.
Yeah.
You know.
It's going to be interesting, let's say.
But I think my kind of point is, and again, you know, we've talked about this before, is do the licensing schemes even really have a place? You know, once this stuff, we've got a couple of years of implementation. You know, we're talking about AWAB's law coming in the year after next, and decent home standard. But once that's all been enacted and implemented, and kind of councils have seen out the licensing schemes that they're doing right now, they're either on one now or they're trying to get one out the barn doors as soon as possible. So we're looking at kind of, you know, licensing schemes running up to kind of 2030, 2031-ish. But, you know, is there an argument that really property licensing schemes don't really have a place in it anymore with everything else?
I mean, we've talked about this so much, haven't we? And my worry is that you're just going to have layer upon layer upon layer of legislation, regulations, license conditions. And again, you know, the more complicated you make it, the harder it is for someone who has good intentions to get it right. And I do think they've missed... someone who wants to get it right. It's harder because of the fact that it's so complicated. Yeah. And also where, you know, there's already so much legislation and regulation. And I think they have missed a trick here in terms of actually bringing it all together.
Simplicity works, right?
Absolutely.
Simplicity works.
If you keep it simple, you will achieve the ultimate aim of keeping properties and tenants safe. Yeah. And actually, the more complicated, the more legislation, the more rules, the harder it is to follow.
And with nuance.
Exactly. With all the changes, with all the different sort of rules that the council's bringing, the different levels of enforcement, it just will become very, very complicated. And, you know, what we are screaming out for as an industry, and it goes right back to what we talked about with the property MOT, is a simple set of standards, a baseline upon which you can build. And instead, we're going to have different rafts of legislation, all trying to achieve actually the same thing. And you know, when you think about, you've already got the homes for fitness and human habitation, which again people don't really refer to. We never hear about being enforced, but it's there. And again, because they missed a trick with it, the concept was absolutely the right thing to do, but it should have been aligned properly with the HHSRS and made one uniform set of standards. And instead, everything sits in silo, and then you've got licensing all alongside it, which makes no sense at all.
Which, look, you know, at the same time, if they'd done it all really simply and really easily, maybe we wouldn't have compliance departments.
I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now.
And I do think, you know, there is the eternal debate of the value agents and property managers bring to the table. And
very much so.
One thing I think is very clear. I think you and I look at what the industry was like when we started. Yeah. And, you know, I say it jokingly, but, you know, I remember the kind of first agency we started with, you know, as a landlord, you were lucky if you got some slightly dog-eared, possibly like coffee-stained contract that had been sent round umpteen people to actually wet sign. And like a gas safety certificate and maybe something that kind of represented an inventory. And that was...
I think when I think back now, when I started my first job was just before deposits became a legal requirement to be registered, and then my first, I don't know if it's first or second year in the job, suddenly we were getting all these deposits registered, and it was such a new phenomenon and such a new thing. And before that, it was pretty much, have you got a gas safety?
that was it, right? It was so light touch. And when we look, yes, rents have climbed, but as an industry, our fee model hasn't fundamentally changed in this country. Not really. We've got our disruptors and everything else, but...
No, it hasn't. And when I think back to the fees charged then, to the fees charged now, they have not changed.
No.
They haven't changed. And actually, we've grown as an industry, and it's right that we have more regulation than just a gas certificate.
Completely.
Absolutely right to have. But it's almost like everyone keeps trying to fix the problem by just layering on more and more legislation. And what needs to happen is some of the other stuff needs to be stripped away and rebuilt.
Like you said, there's some really good bits and pieces there. Fundamentally, when you look at what's there, we've got legislation that should mean tenants are super safe.
Yeah, exactly.
They should be renting very good properties, super safe, and there is a very clear course of action that can be taken against landlords and agents that don't comply in terms of fines and RROs and even property seizure if it gets that extreme. But and again, that comes back to our thing that we kept working on, that banging the drum of, look, we've got some really good bits. Let's just make it really clear and digestible and accessible. As we also know, the trouble with that is our housing market is driven and legislation is driven by politics. Yeah. It is the favourite political football of every party. It is the favourite kind of rotating seat within each political party as well, as we know. I think, last 20 years, I think we averaged like 6 to 8 months with a housing minister in tenure. And that's if you include one of them did like 4 years in there. So take them out, and I think it averages about 5 months a housing minister. Yeah. We just want it to work. But as we know, the trouble with that is politicians don't like kind of rewarding successful things people have done before them. They really want to be able to stick their name on something and be exactly like, I drove that change, that's because of me.
I mean, we can see just from the conversations that have been had in the last 5-6 years of government and the changing governments, that housing has always been a big part of that conversation and debate, and particularly the private rented sector as well. And we know, as you say, it is a political football. There's no doubt it's easy to have the good and the bad sides as such, and a problem to solve.
And we're also in that political landscape now where they flagpole everything right now. I mean, we had it with the budget. Yeah. It's become the kind of political norm again. 10, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of this stuff was kept super secret. Like the odd stuff would leak out.
Yes, it was,
But now the amount of stuff that just kind of gets flagpole to be like, oh, how does our voter base engage with this? Like, oh, we want to tap into the tenant market. How do we, but that doesn't necessarily mean, as we know, you then start floating policies where the title doesn't necessarily actually represent. I mean, the whole removal of Section 21, you and I think and I think most people are pretty aligned on
this. A missell, that one, isn't it?
This mysterious cabal of landlords and letting agents who are throwing tenants out their properties for absolutely no reason at all.
Landlords
other than
who just want to have empty properties sitting there for no good reason. I know.
It's, the flag waving that has and will continue to happen around the removal of Section 21. But, as you and I know, we've drilled down into the data. We think realistically this legislation is probably going to benefit maybe 2% of the market.
Absolutely. I mean, we all know that from the reasons why we see Section 21 be served. And when you think about it, it's being served because there are rent arrears. Well, a landlord can still gain possession on that basis. Antisocial behaviour, still the case. Selling, moving back in, they can still gain possession. And the only problem I see it solving is where we have seen, particularly as we've seen rents shoot up because of the lack of stock. So let's not get confused as to why it's shooting up. It's shooting up because we have seen a reduction in rental stock. And as a result, some landlords have ended a tenancy in order to achieve the market rent that they then can get from new tenants moving in, because their current tenants have declined to pay the increase. And I'm not saying that's right.
No.
I'm not supporting that. But the abolition of Section 21, in my view, that's the only problem I see it solving. But it doesn't really, does it? Because as a landlord, you can still put that rent up by market rent.
You can still
by
put it
just
up.
serving a Section 13 notice.
Exactly.
So
it hasn't protected
it's
a
not
tenant
changed
from that.
anything.
It's massively complicated the antisocial behaviour thing, because that was always, you look at it in schools, you look at it in communities, it's such a nuanced piece of legislation, because what is antisocial behaviour?
Well, what remains to be seen now is the threshold of evidence required. And, I think we're going to have to see a few cases go through to understand the degree. And inevitably, one court will differ to another and so on. But, landlords are going to have very, very clear documents, evidence to show why a tenant is behaving antisocially and what the problem is.
It's just generally, I think now throughout
huge.
Everything you do, whether you're a landlord, a letting agent, or property manager, just keeping a record of everything you do, every conversation you have. Like you said, you guys have been misadvised by council people before. Again, you need to be tracking out. You need to have that. No.
And if I was a landlord, that is what I'd be asking my agent now. How will you be recording these things? How will you be maintaining evidence so that if you're managing my property or even just collecting the rent, but you're the one that people are coming to, how are you going to help me if I come to you later saying I need evidence of those complaints you've received, or what do you know about it? Because I think it is going to be a huge part of an agent's role, particularly if you're relying on an agent to manage your property.
Yeah, and that's where you've got to be able to step up, right? And I think that's
definitely,
that's one thing. We'll need to wrap this up, because we've had a good chat.
We haven't stopped.
I think it's one thing we've talked about at base. We kind of coined this phrase a few years ago now. We call ourselves a landlord's first choice second agent, because the first agent a landlord picks is for a mercurial number of reasons. It's your mate works there, they've just sold the flat next door, the mini pulls up, the morning you have that conversation with your partner, the flyer comes through the door, there's a special offer, whatever it is. There's kind of a myriad of things. If you're not an experienced landlord and you don't really know what the pitfalls are, and as we know, a lot of landlords enter the game in the UK being accidental landlords. It's partner's property, they inherit it, they move in with a partner, whatever. So there wasn't this kind of business objective approach to it. It's like I said, we find landlords often will pick their first agent for whatever reason, and quite often the wrong reason. And then they will go along for however long it goes, because again, as we know, you can run a very tight ship, you can run a very loose ship. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's big chaos happening 24/7, because again,
no, of course,
most tenants just want to rent a home.
They just want a home,
be left alone, to just get on with their lives, and just if something breaks, have it fixed. But as we do know in lettings, when things go wrong, they can go really wrong. And with the new legislation coming in now, the increase of fines, the doubling of RROs, the interlinking of all this legislation, your lockout periods for not being able to relet or, whatever else. It's becoming even more complex and even more scary, and layered on top of all the nuanced stuff that we've talked about and everything that we know. I mean, we've still got delightful stuff like Making Tax Digital kicking in April. We've got the wonderful Mies that keeps dancing around in the background,
which I think a lot of landlords are not aware of yet at all, are they? That's something that is suddenly going to pop up and get a lot of attention, I think.
Well, I think equally, I mean, it's I think again 50-50 with landlords of those. They're the ones that are oblivious, and then there are the ones who've been stung. They've tried to be proactive. They've seen it coming. They've gone out. They've done the work based on what the government was saying 2, 3, 4 years ago. And then the government's moved the goalposts, and those poor buggers have now lost out. They've invested. I mean, I remember I read an article a while back, about a year ago, and it was a landlord who didn't. Okay, they had a big portfolio, but they had invested £1 million in their portfolio, raising the energy standards as much as they could within the announced spend threshold, what the buildings allowed, where they needed to get it to, blah, blah, blah. And then the government moved the goalposts. And so now that £1 million investment will not count. When this legislation does eventually materialise, they will be expected to make probably a similar investment. Is that viable? Is that going to change things for tenants? Who knows? But anyway.
But again, the solution to that would have been so simple. That spend cap should have been allowed to be retrospective for 5 years, let's say. And you have to evidence what you've spent it on. You have to be able to demonstrate it, and you have to demonstrate you've done as much as you can. But what the government would have had, if they had allowed that, would be now properties starting to already be more energy efficient, which is the whole aim of it. Because landlords would have been planning and implementing it, whereas now you've got landlords going, oh, hold on a minute, I nearly did that, and that wouldn't have counted. Exactly.
Well, so I'm not doing anything.
I mean, if you think the amount of properties rated D right now, that a landlord right now could be changing to become a C rating, but they can't and won't because they know it won't apply to the spend cap. And if they can't hit that C, they're going to be made to try again.
Do it again.
Exactly. And so they will just sit now and wait. If that cap applied now, irrespective of when the deadline is, they'd be working on it, and as agents, we'd be encouraging it.
Yeah.
We'd be all out now saying, go and do this now.
Do not get caught in a bottleneck.
Spread your spend.
Spread your costs. Make a plan.
Exactly.
If you're a portfolio, look at where the worst offenders are. Focus on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's...
Yeah, we could put the world to rights.
Well, look, you and I could literally talk all day about the really sexy topic.
I was going to say, this is definitely your sexiest podcast to date, isn't it, Kristjan?
It's how we roll. It's how we roll. But there will be people out there who will, they will absolutely eat this stuff up. Because I think also there's not a lot of podcasts where often people dive into the kind of detail that we have and the nuance. And
there's a reason for that.
Yeah. Well, we're about to find out, aren't we? But I think it's also good. I think agents often feel they don't feel, sometimes fairly, they're not being fairly represented. Yeah. But I think what's really important to know is, like I said, some of the things we've talked about today, Lettings Industry Council, whether you want to be involved or not, I think it's really good for agents to know that there is that out there and working really hard to kind of drive the industry forward, but in a practical,
absolutely, and it's a voluntary membership. There's no sign up required. There's no cost.
There is no sign up,
and you can be as engaged or as little engaged as you want to be. But also, it is. I mean, for me, it's been phenomenal as a way to actually really. When I say network, and it sounds a bit corny, but really engage with the whole sector and get to know people, and that helps you hone your knowledge, but also know and have the comfort that you're doing things right.
And also, like you say, I've met some amazing people through that, and also not only some fascinating conversations, but some people where you're presented with those real, brain-breaking situations, and you're like, do you know who will have the answer for this?
Yes.
So and so.
Yeah.
And invariably, they are almost always someone I've met.
And everyone is aiming, they're working towards the same objective. Everyone wants the same outcome. And it's actually a great space because there's no competitive discussion. No. It's not about the commercials. It's not about any part of your business that you shouldn't be discussing with others. It is purely around best practice in the sector, and it's fantastic, isn't it?
And the nuts and bolts of entry, and equally, obviously, the Zoopla Lettings Advisory Board we sit on.
Exactly.
We've done a lot the last few years. We got although it wasn't the initial objective, we spent a lot of time with DLUC/MHCLG doing a lot of briefings when that really kicked off. Really trying to educate them on the unintended consequences of some of the legislation.
And now the aim is, of course, to try and take our knowledge and help push it out to the consumers of the sector as well, to help them understand, because it is different. I'll be how landlords operate currently without agents, I don't know. In this new world, it's going to be really tough.
What we know is required. I mean, landlords, like you said, because there's no mandatory certification or anything like that, landlords are so innocently unaware
Exactly.
of what's involved.
Totally.
And again, I always bring this back to a conversation I had with a client of ours probably about 10 years ago. As a client we still look after, and I remember he has a few properties in London, and I remember catching up with him, and he'd actually approached us a couple of months before to say, I'm buying a couple of houses in Oxford. Would you like to look after them for me? To which we were like, absolutely not. London only, thank you very much. But, this is a great landlord, right?
Yeah.
Never squints an eye at spending a penny, whether it's compliance or licensing or improvements, refurbishments, whatever. An incredibly intelligent guy. And what was fascinating, we had this chat, and I remember him, kind of playfully boasting about, you know what? I decided to have a crack myself, and I've rented both the houses myself. And it was like, cool. So we like you, so let's have a chat, and we went through, obviously start off with the basics, the gas safety, the tenancy, the deposit registration, done that. And then you start, have you done the EICR? Have you done right to rent checks? Have you done this? Have you done that? And you start laying it on. Have you checked about your local property? And I remember just a few points in, this wasn't anywhere near the end of the conversation, just a few points in, and he went, you do all of that for me on all of our properties? And I was like, dude, I haven't even got started yet. Like, this is just the pretty decorating. Yeah. This is the easy stuff.
It's one of those things, I think, as an agent, because you do it all, it's all in a wrapper. Unless you are a really involved landlord, landlords don't necessarily know just how much is involved. Or even when they know the list, they don't realise how easy it is to slip up on something or get something wrong or miss something. And it is so easy to do, isn't it?
Well, the glorious things like the how to rent guide.
Yeah.
Making sure you've got
simple stuff, but
how
it's
that
so
again
easy
is managed is farcical. But
anyway. And also the record keeping. It's sometimes you may have given it to them. Have you got evidence that you did that? How did you prove it? Exactly. That is
testing of the alarms.
Yeah.
All that joyous stuff.
All of the things that we would keep a record for. How do you prove it?
Anyway, look, we could carry on for ages.
We better stop.
But look, I think do keep an eye out, because like you said, we're going to be kind of on a mission, particularly next year. We've done the initial couple of pieces with Zoopla, but we're going to be putting a lot more consumer education pieces out there. So we're going to be working really hard to help landlords better understand what is involved with all the minutiae of being a landlord, and why letting agents and property managers, or rather the right letting agent and property manager in that process is really, I think, in my mind, post Renters' Rights Act, I just think the risk and the liabilities are just too high.
I agree. And I think, and again, one of our members on the board is the NRLA, the Landlord Association, and I think we all agree that actually landlords should be thinking about both. They should be members of a professional body, or at least be signed up somewhere.
Instructing an agent doesn't indemnify you as a landlord. No,
exactly. And you should instruct an agent too. You really should cover yourself, because it is a changing world now. There is so much more at stake. I mean, all you need to think is, when you think, is it worth it? Oh, the cost of this, cost of that. 24 months rent repayment order.
24 months. £40,000 fine per infringement.
Yeah.
And the only other thing, the only bombshell I'll drop onto the back of that is, we're also coming into a new era of tenant. We're dealing in this world of AI right now, and we're talking about how AI is making companies more efficient and all this sort of stuff. Tenants historically have been, as we've alluded to, because it is so complex, quite uninformed or naive about their rights and their protections. And the quite substantial framework in place to protect them financially and otherwise in these instances. And I think we're coming into an era, I'm not saying there's going to be an intentional shift by tenants, but we're coming into an era where we're all going to have these little AI bots in our phones and our computers going, oh, you received this email from your landlord. I've drafted a response. And it will know the law, or it will think it will know the law anyway. And it will be saying, under article this and under clause this and Housing Act that, you need to do X, Y, Z. And you're going to need to be alert because again, you're going to need to be able to be on top of that stuff so you're not getting caught out. You're going to need to be able to read those responses and go, actually, point 1 and 2, you're correct. And here's that information. But point 3, that's absolute nonsense. Use a better AI bot. And with landlord registers and ombudsmans and everything else coming up, the culpability for landlords, I think it's escalating.
AI is going to help, in a sense, catch out more breaches. There's no doubt about that. It will help tenants understand. Whether it's accurate or not is another thing, but it will help them understand if something has gone wrong. And it is definitely only going to get harder for landlords and easier for tenants in that respect, no doubt.
Well, there you go. We've spent an hour or so wandering our way through the glorious land of lettings legislation and everything else around that. So again, just to reiterate something touched on today, if you're not familiar with or a member of the Lettings Industry Council, look into it, reach out. I think you can go through the website, but if not, feel free to reach out to Nick or I directly and we'll happily kind of refer you over. Do keep an eye out on the content we're going to be working with Zoopla on next year and pushing out through the board. We've already done a couple about, the top 5 tips for landlords and where letting agents add value. Again, any kind of really big wins that you've seen, if you've produced content for your local market and you've found you've had a really good landlord buy-in of landlords going, oh my God, this was mind-blowing for us because we had no idea. It'd be great to hear about that because anything that really you've seen resonate with landlords and lands, we'd really like to know about because we want to educate landlords as to why quality letting agents and property managers are such an essential part of the marketplace. And otherwise, we mentioned a couple of people in here today, but Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I've loved it. And so can you
enjoy your little Christmas period. We've got a few little parties and bits coming up. And then, look forward to seeing what you're up to in the new year.
Yeah, we'll be in touch, definitely. And so thank you very much.
Guys, thank you ever so much. See you soon. Bye.